Earlier today, we got the notes for the March 24 tuning. They are a bit light, which is kind of what I expected. They nerfed a few specs that were at the top of the log statistics and buffed a few specs that were at the bottom. I'm going to go over this patch and the raid statistics in general, and then I will speculate on how this will affect M+ balance as well. So here are the current 95th percentile heroic raid statistics. There is a clear gap from the top 3 specs and a clear gap from the bottom 3 specs. Here it is overlaid with the changes from this patch. So at the top end, there are 3 specs that are kinda destroying, and a lot of this is because of the damage profile in the raid. Pretty much every boss in this raid has a period of 2 target cleave. We have Salhadar Orbs, Valgor and Ezerak in phase 3, you have a large portion of the light blinded Vanguard that's spent as 2 target and as 3 target otherwise, and every other boss has some period where there is another target, there is no single target boss. So naturally, specs that are good at this, like Dev, Marksmanship, Frost Mage, Destro, are really looking good for this raid. And specs that are terrible at 2 target, like Ellie, are looking really bad. Dev Evoker got a 4% nerf, concentrated into Disintegrate and Deep Breath, which is pretty much all of their damage. Now, I'm not surprised in this at all. The Dev profile was extremely good in the raid. It wasn't actually topping the rankings on most bosses, but it was very, very solid on all of them. And then on Valgor and Ezerak, Dev is just the strongest spec by far. Also, it is kind of crazy to look at the rankings on that boss and see one guy taking up 6 of the top 10 slots. Demo Warlock ended up getting a flat 4% nerf. This spec looked very strong on any stacked damage profile. I am a bit surprised that it was performing so well after the previous nerfs, but a lot of that can maybe be attributed to its awful tier set that doesn't even hit a 2% increase. So I do expect Demo to go down a bit further than this 4% nerf next week. And Marksmanship Hunter got a big nerf to Aspect of the Hydra and a bit of a single target buff. Now this makes a lot of sense because the spec was absolutely broken on 2 targets. I've heard there is a bug, but I'm not certain on what it is. But I think the spec got off lightly, and because of the buff, it will still be quite good. Now, Devour Demon Hunter is a spec that looked good and got buffed. Now, I was very confused seeing this, but then I looked at some more statistics, and Devour Demon Hunter is looking pretty bad at actual single target damage to bosses. Now, I do think if this buff is actually 10%, as the sims say, that might be a bit excessive. I can see the argument now that they are liberally buffing it because it is a new spec and they want it to be very playable. All 3 rogue specs were looking pretty bad. They got some small flat aura buffs. Right now, the rogue specs look kinda even with each other in heroic, but subs tier set looks very good compared to the others, so it'll probably pull ahead next week. BM Hunter also got a flat buff, but I don't think it'll be played. MM just looks too good in comparison. And Elemental Shaman got a large 8% buff spread across multiple single target abilities. Ellie will definitely be simming very high on single target, but as we have seen, that does not translate well into the raid. I predict it will still be underperforming. Ellie also does have a pretty good tier set, so hopefully it will rise a bit next week. Now, of course, heroic week statistics are a very unreliable source. Nobody has tier set, people are missing a lot of stats, and a lot of us are missing our best trinkets. So some classes will go up and some classes will go down next week. I must say though, this is an exercise of why pre-raid sims are not a credible source, because Feral Druid and Ellie Shaman are definitely not pulling these numbers right now. In the patch, there is some healer tuning as well. There is a clear divide in heroic right now. Prez and Disc are looking to be the best healers, Mistweaver is okay, and all the other healers are doing a lot worse. Now, HPS is not something you can measure like this, and this is 30-man, but there is a definite trend. And here is the graph overlaid with the changes. Numbers might be plus minus 1%, but there isn't really much to talk about beyond this. I don't expect a massive shakeup, and I feel like the best healers for raid will remain the best. Also, there was a nerf to Lightsmith HPAL. I don't know why they are doing this. Lightsmith is not really being played in any PvE content. And in light of this, I wanted to use this space to bring awareness that back in beta, they nerfed Avenging Crusader in preparation for a 58% Hammer of Wrath buff that they never actually did. And for tanks, there were no changes. Guardian Druid did end up getting a massive nerf last week. I think it was like a 30% nerf or so, but it is somehow still doing a lot of damage, like way more than the other tanks. I'm not sure if this translates into Mythic. I know Guardian does lose quite a bit of damage if you are actively tanking, but it also does have a good tier set, so we will see what happens with this, I guess. I don't have much more to say about raid. Heroic statistics are kind of just a tool of speculation, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were some specs that were a bit more viable on the Mythic versions of the bosses, but I am curious to see what Race World first runs, because I think there are some specs that are looking very insane at the moment. Note, I am expecting 1 or 2 more balance changes to be posted this Monday. Now let's talk about M+. It's been a month since I made my M+ tier list, and last week on the March 17th tuning patch, almost every class got a change. I made this visualization a week ago on every class that got a buff or nerf in that patch, and I updated it today. In my opinion, this is the status of most specs relative to how they were at the end of beta, but I think this level of change demands a remake in the tier list. Free disclaimer, this tier list will be purely speculative, and I will go quickly. Now to start it off, my S tier will consist of Devourer and Ellie. They are both raid buff specs that were buffed after underperforming in raid. They were both quite good in M Plus before, so I am expecting to see big things from them. Brewmaster is the clear winner for best tank, as they only nerfed Master of Harmony, but most of them were just playing Shadow Pan in M Plus anyways. And Resto Druid is just looking like the healer. They tried to nerf it, but it fell way too far down in raid, so they had to buff it back up again. I think other healers are viable, but Resto will win out just because of Mark. Now I'm making an A+ tier for this tier list. These 3 specs that I thought were OP back in beta, they all did get knocked down a peg. Arcane got an AoE nerf and a single target buff. Demo got 2 nerfs in a row, and Unholy got a nerf and then a massive buff back up. I think all 3 of these specs will still be very good, but I am skeptical if they will actually be meta. Now, because this tier list is very speculative, I want to make a new tier called Dark Horse. These are specs that were not very good in beta and were not played much. They all got significant buffs in the March 17 patch, but we will have to wait and see if any of them actually perform well in M+. And a note, I think the prevalence of Brewmaster does allow physical specs to enter the scene if they are good enough. Now, what I said doesn't apply to Org. I put Org here because it was looking very good in beta. A lot of people were playing it, but then it got a significant nerf, and I've heard a lot of discourse about it, so I'm really not sure if it's going to remain good or not. In A tier, I would place these specs. I think Frostmage looks really good right now in M0s, but once you get to sustained AoE situations, I think it starts to fall off, as we saw in beta. Ret got some nice buffs, but I feel like Ret is unlikely to scrape the meta, as always. And Enhanced looks actually decent now, but probably worse than Ellie. I feel like Guardian is doing so much that it can still hold on, however, it is probably not realistic in M+, to be doing maximum damage, of course. And I brought Prot Warrior up here because it is probably looking to be the second best tank. And then in B tier, I have a bunch of other specs that saw minimal changes since my last tier list video. And in C, I am not too sure. These specs were quite bad in beta, but they have seen some moderate buffs, so they could potentially be better than I think. Arms Warrior was taken out of F tier, although its single target is still very poor. And Shadow Priest had its Psychic Link nerfed a lot. I initially put it down to D, but after a buff, I'm moving it back up to C. So there it is. This is my speculative M+ tier list, and I will reiterate that it is speculative. Nobody has tested any of these specs in Mythic Plus since the changes were announced. Now, I don't normally do this, but I wanted to give you an update on my channel. In case you didn't know, I am the raid leader of a guild that typically finishes top 15 world, so I will be very busy in the coming weeks. Thank you to everyone who has been watching me for this expansion launch cycle. I have been reading your nice comments, and I appreciate them. I will put the tier list back for the end of the video. Also, in case you didn't know, I stream regularly on Twitch, and I guess you could subscribe to this channel or something. I'll see you all in a few weeks. Goodbye.